Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Jesse O'Sullivan. I'm Policy Counsel at Circulate San Diego, and we're here to talk about how to get involved in community planning. And so we'll go around and do some introductions, and then Marlon from the City of San Diego's Planning Department has a presentation for us, and then we'll turn it over to the panel discussion. So Manny, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Manny Rodriguez, and I am on the Downtown Community Planning Council, and I also have a nonprofit called WalknRoll San Diego that educates the public on safe street design. I'll pass it over to Marlon.
Manny, hi everyone, Marlon Pangilinan, Interim Program Coordinator with the City of San Diego Planning Department. Go ahead, Dike, take it away.
Thank you, Marlon. Good evening. My name is Dike Anyiwo. I serve as the chair of the Midway-Pacific Highway Community Planning Group, and I think that's why I'm here tonight.
Great. Thank you all. And Marlon, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Screen. And one more button. All right. Okay. I think everyone can see my screen. Just going to do a little bit of moving here of menus. Okay. Destroy that one down. All right. So good evening, everyone. Again, Marlon Pangilinan, Interim Program Coordinator with the City of San Diego Planning Department. I've been with the Planning Department for 21 years working in long-range community planning. Currently, I'm working in the public engagement section of the department, focusing on community planning group reform and coordination. The topic for this evening's webinar deals with how we get involved in community planning. So my presentation tonight will be providing an overview on public input, community planning groups, and getting involved in the initiatives that my department is working on. Let's see, we have in place several traditional ways that the public can provide input and engage in city programs and projects. So at the top here, we have public hearings, where the public testimony is provided at hearings, which is like City Council, Planning Commission hearing officer, and also at City Council subcommittees like Land Use and Housing or the Rules Committee. These committees provide direction to staff and recommendations to City Council. Next, we have community-based organizations or CBOs. These are typically your nonprofit, non-governmental, or charitable organizations that represent community needs and work to help them on certain issues and topics in the community, like community health advocacy, education, team support organizations, etc. Next, we have our community planning groups, or CPGs. I think everyone here is pretty familiar with the advisory role of our planning groups and the role of representing their respective communities on land use matters. They've been around since the 60s and 70s, and I'll be talking about the status of our planning groups in an upcoming slide. Last, we have some of our tried and true ways of providing input, which are emails, letters, phone calls, and then these are very traditional avenues for providing input. We've also innovated with online forums and engagement tools for creating and informing land use scenarios, and surveys meant to solicit broad input and engagement in digital formats as well, which are also emphasize convenience. But we still do in-person events. We utilize multiple approaches. The best way to know about in-person events is to sign up for our updates on each of our project web pages. The timelines associated with our projects are also very helpful. They show various points in the process where the public can provide input. This is an example taken from our Blueprint SD webpage. Blueprint SD is our update to the general plan that aligns all our objectives for providing more opportunities for homes and public spaces near transit with our climate action goals. In this example, we have a citywide survey open with upcoming opportunities to provide feedback on the draft general plan amendment, environmental document, and provide comment at public hearings and meetings. On planning groups, so Council Policy 600-24, which is our council policy which governs the roles and responsibilities of our planning groups, was amended last fall. That was a result of a San Diego County grand jury report and performance audit from the city auditor that reported on the effectiveness of our community planning groups. That was also followed up by a legal analysis by our city attorney's office indicating that the structure of Our planning groups as advisory groups conflict with the city charter in that they aren't created by ordinance, nor are their duties set forth by ordinance or by the city charter. And they are also not appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. So to address this, planning groups and new groups will need to be recognized as independent legal groups. And so there's an application process that's currently being formulated, and that was established by the adoption of the council policy amendment last year. The process does allow for new groups to apply to represent a planning area, and we're also putting together our outreach program, which will include an information session, 3 workshops, as well as individualized assistance for follow-up with the planning groups. The process in terms of applications being due, they will be due at the end of the year, and staff will be bringing applications forward to City Council in the spring of 2004. Equity Forward is our comprehensive approach to creating a more equitable, healthy, and enjoyable place for all San Diegans. The evolving policies, plans, and processes under Equity Forward will create more equitable opportunities and investments in the city. By acknowledging the effects of policy decisions that have resulted in inequitable outcomes, Equity Forward will leverage the diversity of voices in our city to benefit all San Diegans. So on this slide, these are all the topic areas under Equity Forward. Each of the areas have their own specific initiatives. Under environmental justice, we have the environmental justice element, which is an amendment to the general plan. This new element of the general plan will ensure that people of all races, cultures, and incomes are equally and equitably valued, protected, and served by our city. This will include also regulations and policies that impact the quality of the environment around us, such as transportation, parks, natural spaces, these services, and the overall use of land. In the area of parks and open space, it involves the Choice Creek Watershed Park Master Plan and Trails Master Plan that will increase equitable access to public parks and open space, as well as a Park Needs Index. The Park Needs Index will provide a metric to help prioritize park investments in areas with the greatest need. The inclusive community engagement topic will include capital improvement program prioritization, which is our capital projects, and streamlining the infrastructure delivery process, as well as the inclusive public engagement guide, which I'll discuss in the next slide. The last area is called High Impact Public Spaces, which contains our Partnering for Progress initiative that involves working with outside organizations like philanthropies and nonprofits to identify opportunities for greater efficiency, coordination, and cooperation when it comes to developing public spaces. So stay informed and involved on these various initiatives. We have a general timeline on the webpage that shows when these various initiatives will be taking place, as well as an intake form available on the Equity Forward webpage at sandiego.gov/Equity Forward for people wanting to participate, to detail how much time they want to dedicate to these efforts and how they want to be involved. The citywide inclusive public engagement guide will serve as the foundation for city employees to implement a meaningful public engagement program that provides guidelines for how city decisions consider input from community members and representatives of the population's demographics, so that these decisions ultimately improve San Diegans' quality of life. The guide is focused on building trust, transparency, and desired outcomes. This is a guide that will serve as a toolkit for inclusive engagement for every city department, and it will include new strategies to reach people facing barriers to traditional forms of participation, like attending evening meetings or public meetings, and to truly represent the community. We are in the process of forming a focused discussion group for the engagement guide. We're looking for about 10 to 15 community members who will share lived experiences and perspectives on community engagement. The meeting commitment will be through April through June, and applications are actually due today. So if you're interested, please visit the website and fill out the application. It should only take you about 7 minutes. Other ways to get involved and stay connected on this initiative. We also have an online survey available, a fact sheet that's available to share, and then you can also sign up for updates on the Inclusive Public Engagement Guide website. Oops, one more slide here. Another resource for the public to be involved in community planning is our, overall website, where you can find the most up-to-date information on all things we are working on and learn more about them. Put that out. And that concludes my presentation on how everyone can get involved in community planning, as well as a number of programs that my department is working on. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Marlon. Let's do our panel discussion. So. Great. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our panelists answer some questions. I prepared some questions ahead of time. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll throw those in as well. So just a second. So I was wondering if we could maybe have, Manny, maybe we can talk with you about what avenues there are to get involved in the community planning process.
Yeah, so Marlon already mentioned several of them. I think very important ones, sort of a starter, is to get involved with your local community planning group. You can go to the San Diego's planning department websites and find out which one corresponds to your community. Show up to a few meetings and make yourself known. You can also participate in your local business improvement district. They are also responsible for building landscaping, infrastructure improvements, lighting, and also another route is through advocacy and nonprofit work. For example, in my nonprofits, WalknRoll San Diego, we walk around to San Diego and we film good and bad street design and bring it to the attention of people. And that we've informed a lot of people on better street design and built teams where we can go out together and advocate both at city council or community meetings and in support of safer streets. So those are some avenues. Dike, you want to offer any other ones?
Yeah, thanks, Manny. And I think all of those ones that you said are important and accurate. If you mentioned business improvement districts, I'd also say maintenance assessment districts and parking districts. For those of you, these are all different sort of formats or configurations, if you will, of organizations that basically have a vested interest in any sort of, specific geographic footprint, right? A neighborhood that you bound by some, sorry, it's my cat, that you bound by some.
Cats are always welcome on Zoom.
Yeah, they're always welcome, right? She knows exactly when I'm on camera. Outside of that, similarly, I've been involved with my community planning group. I think over the last 4 or 5 years, that's been a really important avenue that we've seen like really effective outcomes come from. The only other thing that I can maybe mention is just that, without, I guess I should say inclusive of community planning groups, there is also the Community Planners Committee, which is sort of like, for the 42 different groups that are out there across the city, once per month, each of these different groups send one member to like a joint meeting. So any sort of, to your point, public comment that you can make at whether it's city council committee, community planners committee, also the planning commission is another avenue where you can always make your voices heard.
Yeah, and Dike, can you talk a little bit about the Midway height limit?
Yeah, and so I guess I mentioned important outcomes, and so for those of you who are familiar with the Midway-Pacific Highway community planning area, this might be mundane, but it's an area that's just north of downtown, just west of the 5 freeway, kind of on your way into Point Loma. And over the last few years, our planning group sort of executed the community plan update for our neighborhood. In 2018 is actually when that was finalized. It started in 2007. It was an 11-year process for a variety of reasons that we won't get into right now. But effectively, once 2018 hit, and we updated our community plan, the next order of business as far as our priorities were when it comes to redeveloping, rezoning, revitalizing this wider community was addressing a 30-foot height limit that had been in place since the early 70s, right? So for about 50 years, north of downtown and west of the 5 freeway was subject to a moratorium on new building construction or anything over 30 feet. And so our planning group, like I said, when we were doing our community plan update, tried to exempt ourselves from that process during that, from that
from that limit during that process, but that wasn't, sort of legally the way to go about doing it. So what we did is passed a community plan update that substantively rezoned the neighborhood, and then like immediately afterwards started focusing on how do we address this height limit across our community. So we were able to work, let's say, hand in hand with our community, with our city planner, our city council District 2 office, as well as the mayor's office at the time, organize a community activity, and basically we're able to pass a citywide ballot measure in 2020. Well, there's a lawsuit and there's all kinds of different background, but I think the point of the matter is, when it comes to like what a community planning group can do, like I said, we're advisory as far as the city of San Diego is concerned. We are acknowledged by the city of San Diego, and because we as a planning group, as a community planning group, really sort of articulated our needs, our vision for this community, we were able to collaborate very, say, effectively. Like I said, with a number of different stakeholders across a wide jurisdiction, wide range of jurisdiction, and affect some, I'd say, significant change.
Yeah, it's a really cool project that you all did there. I was going to say, so we talked a lot about ways that people can get involved, sort of going to the city. So you can go to your community planning group or your bid or your maintenance assessment district. You can go to the city council. You can go to the city council committees. If you want to do all those things, a great way to know what's going on is to sign up for email updates. And there's email updates. So a separate place to sign up from the planning department, from the land use and housing committee, active transportation and infrastructure committee, from the city council committee. Those are ways you can all stay informed about what's going on in the city. But I also wanted to ask a little bit whether you had experience sort of inviting, could talk a little bit about how to invite the city to come to you. If you have an organization or a group that you want to hear from the city, and maybe this, Marlon, maybe this is a good one for you. If somebody has Manny wants to invite a planner to come out and talk to City Heights CDC about some new project. How does that process work? How can people bring the city to them?
Sure. So, you could simply just contact the community planner for your area and make the request. Certainly there are, certain topics that different people in our department are working on. So if it's like, more of an emphasis on housing and kind of what the initiatives of the department are for housing, we certainly have a division or a section in our department that's dealing specifically with that. So it might not necessarily be your actual community planner, but they would be your first point of contact for requesting, any information or, just a request to attend a meeting and provide some information or advice on a certain topic. So we're always open to doing that, especially as our, schedules allow. Hopefully there's no conflicts with other communities and whatnot, because several of us have more than one community that we're dealing with, and oftentimes there's conflicts. But we try to make those assignments where that doesn't happen, so that we can get a planner assigned to a particular area and be able to attend those meetings and prevent the conflict. So yeah, just start out by just contacting your assigned community planner.
Great. Let's see, Manny, do you want to talk about when you decided to join a community planning group and how that happened, what that process was like?
Yeah, so for a long time now, I've been a strong proponent of walkable communities and walkable, bikeable communities. And so through Twitter, I followed accounts that promoted that, and Circulate was among one of them. And Circulate on their Twitter account posted, "Oh, we're having a how to get involved community planning group webinar," very much like this one. This was like well over a year ago, and so I joined it, and I was like, all the questions that most of them got answered. And then like the very next week, I joined a community planning group meeting, and then the next month, I ran for election, and then I got elected. And I think it's been a great ride ever since. And I'd like to thank Jesse and team here at Circulate for hosting these. Hoping that in this audience there are future community planners that'll join their community group. It's a lot less intimidating. I mean, it can seem very intimidating. Every person I've seen first join a community planning group, it's very intimidating. But once you realize it's just your neighbors, and there's they're not gonna look at your resume or CV or anything. They're just your neighbors. Treat them like you normally would, and you'll find it's a lot more relaxed than it might seem.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that we could be helpful to you and inspire you to join. What was the election process like? What did you have to submit an intent to run, or how does that, how do you announce your candidacy? How do you what do you do?
For downtown, you announce your candidacy, and in a month before elections, they would give a platform for everyone to speak at the board meeting. And from then, that was pretty much how it was. You had to attend, I believe it was one meeting to run. But other than that, and also, provide proof of residence and proof of identity. All of these steps were incredibly simple and nothing too crazy. So yeah, very simple process, at least for my community planning group.
Yeah. DK, do you want to talk about what it was like to join your community planning group?
Yeah, it was sort of similar origin, actually. I think I too, maybe back in 2017, 2018, a few years ago, was invited or made aware of the fact that Circulate was hosting one of these how do you get involved type things. So alumni as well, Manny. But basically, yeah, was made aware of the fact that these things exist. I think at that time, I just happened to be going through a phase of interest in civic engagement, public affairs, just these, general community things. And so was made aware of the existence of, started kind of just attending and sitting it out there in the audience, and kind of listening to the agenda, listening to the the meetings themselves. But after a few meetings of sitting there, the lady who was the chair at the time, my predecessor, she actually approached me and said, "Hey, good afternoon, thanks for coming. I've seen you here a few times, and I'm just curious, kind of what brings you out?" Because the Midway-Pacific Highway community planning area, like I said, for those of you who are aware, it's not necessarily like a very heavily residential neighborhood. I think most of the interests that have populated our planning group have been some version of either property owner or business interest over the last few years. And so residents are actually few and far between. And that's something a little bit different, I'd say, about Midway than most of the other planning groups I've seen that tend to be very heavily dominated by residents of any given community. And so ultimately, when I initially was approached by this lady, I said, I was just kind of curious in general. But she said, "Oh, if you're a resident, I live in the neighborhood," is what I told her. And she said, "Oh, if you're a resident in this neighborhood, you qualify to sit on this board. We have vacancies. And I'd really love it if you would consider, maybe stepping up and filling one of these vacancies." And so at the time, and honestly, initially, kind of what Manny had mentioned, it's very intimidating, and I was intimidated myself, so I actually declined. But it wasn't until a few months later, after I continuously been, just been present and started to learn, and I realized kind of at that time, this is early 2018, like I said, we were kind of wrapping up our community plan update process. And so as I started to really understand what that meant, the, I guess, interest of the planning group and the future of that planning group at the time became more of interest to me. So I was able to step up and be basically appointed to a vacancy by the existing membership of the board. And after a couple of years, like I said, was made vice chair, and ultimately now at this point I'm chair. But I was able to fill a vacancy, right? There was someone who had previously been elected to a 3-year term. Across the city, a number of these different groups have different sort of configurations or bylaws, but our group seats 12, right? And we basically have an election every year for 4 seats. So every year we kind of have this like rolling cascading thing where there are 4 seats that are open, and we try to kind of do that in order to keep a balance of experience and expertise on our board. So I was able to actually step into a vacancy for a 2.5-year term. Someone had just recently been elected and unfortunately had to relocate away from the area. And so ever since then, like I said, I've been a member of this board, not through an election process, but mainly just because affirmation of the existing board.
Great. Yeah, it's a great opportunity to highlight how different community planning groups can be. So DK getting appointed, Manny running in an election. Those elections can look really different depending on the community that you're in. Often the participation in the election is not a large number of people, but sometimes it is. The Uptown Community Planning Group in particular has had a lot of turnout in their elections. And so it's can be a really different vibe. It's worth visiting your community's community planning group to sort of check it out and get a sense for how that particular community planning group works. Also, just by the way, I'm taking questions. If you drop a question in the chat box, I'm happy to sort of include it in my questions here. How do you expect things to change after community planning group reform?
open question to all of us?
Sure.
Anyone?
Anyone?
I think for the last few years, I'd say community planning group reform included, the city's been moving towards a more sort of ministerial approvals process. They're trying to, I think, incentivize it. It feels not just the city, frankly, it's the state. There's sort of wide, broad sweeping, I think, recognition that, housing and the cost of housing in the state of California is an issue. And so because of, I think, that recognition, we've started to see this larger trend. So planning group reform, I think, fits, like I said, within this larger trend of how do we potentially remove barriers or perceived barriers to development, frankly. And so now that this has been, sort of drafted and passed, I expect that we're going to see exactly the intended outcome, right? You're going to see less of a community touch. You're going to see less of sort of the qualitative critiques or maybe elements of certain projects. I think you're going to see a lot of things that get built that are sort of more formulaic. Not that there won't be, artistry or any sort of, aesthetic. I'm sure there will be. But ultimately, I think one of the big impacts of community planning group reform, like I said, is in line with this wider movement of how we're trying to, we as a society, I say, like I said, streamline development and address one of the most gripping issues of the day.
Yeah, just what Dike said, less input from the groups as it becomes more ministerial. And it doesn't mean that developers will completely stop coming to community planning groups. They can still choose to come to a community planning group if they would like. So one thing I think might happen with community planning groups that they might be, might have to build more collaborative relationships with developers, just to be able to bring them to the table. Because if a developer at least presents to a community planning group, you can at least, give a opinion, whereas none at all.
Yeah, and I should add to that, I think also one of the other sort of impacts, or I think the question was how will things change, is, one of the intended, I think, changes to planning groups was to make them more representative of any given community. And so to sort of, in some communities, this is not an issue that I think is specific to Midway, but this is just sort of my perspective, having been around this process for the last few years, to sort of dilute the input or the say-so of single-family homeowners. And so, like I said, because if you look at the city of San Diego representatively, there are 55%, almost 60% of the city of San Diego's residents are renters, right? They're not single-family homeowners. And so to see, broadly speaking, I'd say historically, such heavy concentration of single-family homeowners on these different planning groups, like I said, part of this impact, and I think one of the things that will change as a function of the passing, part of the intended impact is to, like I said, dilute that voice and make it more representative of the different populations and communities that exist. So I expect that to be something that we see once these documents are made apparent and we understand how we're supposed to, move forward with this recognition process.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of community planning groups, their boards are not necessarily representative of their populations they represent. So hopefully with these reforms, we can see better representation of the community through the planning board.
I think also the conversation's gotten a little bit, maybe a little bit inside baseball for anybody who doesn't already know about community planning group reform. So just I'll give a broad overview of what is contained in the community planning group reform. So Marlon gave some of that before, which is that there was this analysis from the city attorney and also a grand jury report. And basically the conclusions of those were that the way that community planning groups are currently operating was in conflict with the city charter, and that the community planning groups could be more diverse and more representative of the communities that they're supposed to be representing. And so the solutions contained in the community planning group reform, first of all, to make them in compliance with the city charter, again, you had to the options were to either amend the city charter and make the community planning groups go through more official election processes, which involve financial disclosures and all sorts of other processes, or to make the community planning groups more independent. And so that was the option that was chosen. And then the other was to try to bring in more diverse voices into the community planning groups. And so that each community planning group is required to have a diversity plan. Community planning groups are several community planning groups had previously required that you have to attend a community planning group meeting in order to vote in the election, which would be sort of like requiring that you attend a city council meeting in order to vote for your city council person. And so that requirement is now gone. And so the intent there is to make community planning groups more accessible. And then I'll also say, you know, the community planning groups have been sort of pulled out of some of the official processes of the city as a result of becoming more independent organizations. And that does remove a point for a place where community planning groups can exercise power. But I would also say that this doesn't, you know, remove the power of community planning groups from the process, right? Like there's plenty of organizations, groups, people who have influence on city processes who aren't even in organizations that are recognized by the city, right? Like at your local town council, some of the business organizations around, other groups of just people organizing around an issue can have a really big impact on city policy. So I think community planning groups will continue to have influence in that sort of way.
Yeah, and to add on to Jesse, like the approval or blessing of community planning group is still very important for the development services department and the planning department and for developers. So a lot of developers or just anyone doing any type of development in the community will still, you know, I would consider or even go to community planning groups because they know how much an approval means to the city.
It's that political cachet. Just wanted to add to what everyone had mentioned is that, you know, in some instances there have been developers who kind of understand that their process for, you know, proposing a new development project would be ministerial as opposed to discretionary, but they've come to the planning group, you know, as an information item to share what they're proposing and, you know, get any initial feedback. And the planning group's, you know, well aware that, you know, that the project is informational and that, you know, they're still appreciative that the developer or the property owner did come before them to get some information. And, you know, at some time, you know, it's also possible that that applicant could also take into consideration some of the things that were brought up, but they, you know, wanted to go there to get that input. And then I wanted to add also too, in terms of like what could change in terms of development projects. And, you know, we've been looking at a lot of the agendas that come through every month from all the planning groups. And we have noticed that there aren't a lot of projects like back in the day, especially when, you know, redevelopment was in place. You were seeing lots of projects going on in City Heights, in the college areas, especially that had those project areas established. And now we're not really seeing that. And that could be, you know, pretty much a result of one, you know, well, redevelopment did go away. But also a lot of the city processes for, you know, development projects have been, as the folks here have said it, streamlined, you know, incentivized for more affordable housing and, you know, other things. So, you know, therein lies, you know, kind of the internal processes kind of, you know, I guess changing the way projects come before the community. And then last, I wanted to say what Jesse said was that doesn't preclude you know, the planning groups from providing input on, you know, on projects. I mean, if someone doesn't show up to their meeting, well, that, you know, that's their just, you know, that's their decision. But still, the planning group can forward a letter to the city, which would be provided as part of public testimony on any discretionary project.
Thanks for that. Not seeing any audience questions yet. I would love to be able to answer anything specifically that you might have questions or concerns about. So please, I invite you to type that in the chat. Manny, do you have a particular moment on your community planning group that you can think of where you felt like you got to make an impact on something that you cared about?
Yes. Yeah, I can think of two in particular. One was someone wanted to demo a two-story building to build a surface parking lot on one of the most vibrant streets of the East Village. That was already a non-starter, like the surface parking lot. You know, I rallied the community planning group around it and, you know, managed to, you know, disapprove the project. Another more lighthearted parking lot issue that came up was a very recently, one developer wanted to build a temporary surface parking lot in a much less vibrant part of the East Village. You know, they said, oh, I wanted to build temporary because we don't have the funding and the capital to build a high rise yet. And the current site had no buildings. It was just an empty dirt lot. And, so there was like, at least a parking lot would fix up the surrounding sidewalk. They offered to fix up the surrounding sidewalk and, do some beautification and also file a letter of agency that would, prevent encampments on that site. And not only that, we pushed them to do all that stuff, right? But we also pushed them to agree to allow activation on the site. So, this developer, they wrote a letter to us saying we will not oppose activation on the site. Community groups or private companies, for example, Courtyard in the East Village is also on the surface parking lot. They can use the site for events. They will not deny food trucks from operating there, or they will happily close down the site for the community to host anything it wants. That was something that came about because me and one of my other friends on the board said, hey, there's like nothing here on this part of the East Village, but we can at least provide a benefit to the community, because a surface parking lot to the community of the East Village is not a good thing, because it just brings more traffic and more cars, and we walk around the streets a lot, so it's just more higher chances of getting hit by a car. But we worked with the developer and said, hey, we'll approve this if you allow us to use this as a community space. And if you also, add tree grades, do some art here, fix the sidewalk that's broken over here, fix the street lights. And, I think I'm really proud of that moment. And we're still working with them to, find ways to activate the site. But that is one way you can, use community planning groups to bring about better change.
Cool, that's a great story. Dike, you have something other than the height limit?
Other than the height limit, something that I'm particularly proud of? Yeah, actually, so Midway is a very dynamic community. There's too many things happening, it feels like, honestly. So we talk about the sports arena a lot. Obviously, the height limit gets a lot of attention, but there's another mega project, I think is fair to call it. The Navoir, so the Navy's Navoir complex sits within the bounds of our community planning group as well. And so those of you who have been in town for any length of time, you remember, I think it was the summer of 2021 when they initially sort of unveiled their renderings for that 70-acre redevelopment project and saw, I mean, we had been in touch, and I think we had been being kept abreast of the Navy's process as they look to redevelop their property there and, kind of make a new headquarters and, do whatever else they want to do. 70 acres is a massive footprint. Like the sports arena itself, just for context, is a 50-acre site of redevelopment, but it's a city of San Diego property. This Navy complex is 70 acres. It's federal property, so none of our local jurisdiction or local zoning laws pertain to that, right? Their clearance supersedes ours, so to say. But honestly, over the course of the process of them, one, deciding that they wanted to redevelop, two, announcing it, three, sort of soliciting input, I'd say our planning group was heavily engaged, heavily involved from an early stage. But ultimately, when the comment window opened up for that first sort of phase, we had initiated an ad hoc subcommittee that actually I somehow wound up becoming the chair of. And over the course of, I'd say about I think it was a 60-day comment window. So just about for those entirety of the 60 days, when they published their 1,300-page EIS, environmental impact statement, we broke it up into chunks, and obviously we didn't all read every page, but we were able to compile a 13-page sort of, I don't know if a dossier is the right word, but basically a report or, sort of a 13-page document that listed all of our questions, our comments, our concerns. We took the perspective of evaluating what they were talking about, potentially building on that site in the context of our community plan and saying, okay, how, if I was to summarize our community plan, I'd say it's still a little bit, auto-centric, in my opinion, very sort of mid-rise. Most of the height limits that are associated with the base zones of our planning group are somewhere between 45 to 75 feet. So not, real tall, big downtown level sort of skyscrapers, more kind of think Mission Hills area. But we evaluated what the Navy was talking about compared to our community plan, and we're able to come up, like I said, with a 13-page document of questions, comments, concerns, feedback really for the Navy to take. And I don't want to say that it was our work alone, right? Because I think a lot of people got switched on when they first saw those renderings that the Navy had put out. I don't, they got a lot of feedback, but the Navy basically went back and scrapped their entire process. for how they were previously looking to dispose of that land or to look to redevelop it. And like I said, it's not the kind of thing that gets a lot of credit or gets a lot of sort of airtime compared to the height limit, which has been a saga, right? The sports arena, which has been a saga of its own. But the Navy redevelopment of the Navarre site is another major thing that our planning group has been highly and heavily engaged in. And I suspect we will continue to be as they continue to move forward. But I will say that process was illuminating. I've never reviewed an environmental impact statement because that's not what I do professionally, or I guess as a volunteer thing. So I did it in my spare time. But it was a really good experience, and I'm proud of, like I said, the outcome and the sort of the pivot that the Navy, I wouldn't say was forced to, but thought honestly, based on the feedback they received, was in their best interest as far as how they want to go about moving forward and redeveloping their sites. That's something that I could say I was proud of, that maybe doesn't get talked about very often.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's I mean, first of all, those renderings were even just on an artistic level, like you could have put the same amount of density and at least made it was just boxes.
Bad.
But I also want to say, I think that's a great example of places that CPGs can have influence even where they don't have like a formal legal power, because even the city, like the Navy can literally just do whatever it wants on Navarre. They're not going to, because they respect other people's opinions and they'd like to be, have good relationships with the community. And that's sort of where the chance for the community planning group or anybody else in the city to have input on that comes from. Let's see. Crystal asks, what is the typical time commitment for service on a community planning group?
I can start with that one. So for most community planning groups I'm aware of, the bare minimum requirement of service is like 1 monthly meeting in person. That is a bare minimum. And these meetings can range from 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours, usually, hopefully, depending on how it depends on the rest of the board. You can have a lot of people that are like super get into the weeds. Generally, most people want to be out of there in 2 hours. But there's also more opportunities for involvement. You can join a subcommittee and spend more time than just 1 monthly meeting doing stuff like Dike mentioned. Even reading a very dense, large environmental impact statement. So, that can also be part of your time. Just the bare minimum is 1 monthly meeting for almost every planning group, and how much of an impact you want to have will then just correlate to how much time you spend doing extra stuff like stuff Dike was doing.
Dike, does that sound right to you?
I think it does. Yeah, I like the way Manny sort of contextualized it. Right, there's the minimum, and there's like the crazy people like us who do way more than that. I'd say your monthly meeting is typically the real sort of the baseline for what you can expect to contribute. About 2 hours on average per month, I think is fair to say. I'd say as chair of the planning group, I've noticed my involvement and my commitment has increased over the years because I think continued to just lean further in. So, for example, I mentioned the Community Planners Committee earlier, and so every planning group in themselves meet once per month. But independently of your individual planning group meeting, another meeting also once per month on a different day, hopefully for you, is the CPC, right? And I, in my mind, for whatever reason, always kind of consider like the Knights in the Round Table type situation, but you basically get a citywide meeting of all these different planning groups, and you check in and you get sort of the same type of updates. You get updates that can then be dispersed back down to the different planning groups. And so that's another thing that typically takes another 2 hours per month. I've been our CPC, typically the chair or sometimes the vice chair is your CPC rep, but somehow I became the CPC rep maybe a month or two after I became a normal board member. So that added, a couple hours per month. I'd say, to Manny's point, the subcommittee commitments, if you're in leadership, right, there's certain just amounts of time you can expect to dedicate towards coordinating any given agenda, right? And whether that's something that you are going to then sort of research and present yourself, right? That's something I've done as a chair or chair of a group or a subcommittee, is present information myself, do some research, and sort of invite the group to have a discussion. Or oftentimes it's booking someone like Marlon or some subject matter expert to come and speak about whatever given issue. I think oftentimes, certainly in the past, I'll be curious to see how much this happens going further forward. When developers or sort of project applicants are looking for some version of approval or feedback from the planning group, you know, liaising with them and making sure that, you know, you've got all the equipment or, you know, information that you need to share out to your board ahead of time. Like there's time that you can expect, but I think the bare minimum is about 2 hours. I probably spend per month, right? 2 hours per month. I probably spend somewhere between 5 to 10 hours per month, but that's because I'm a maniac and there's a lot to do in Midway.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dike brings up a good point. You know, I'm a secretary of my CBG, and so it's like that brings it up to 5 to 10 per month, because the chair will say, hey, can you call this and so developer because they want to be in our board meeting, or can you I have to type up the minutes, make them look clean and maintain the website, all this kind of stuff, and like Dike said, liaison, reach out to people who want to present. So if you want to, but then again, sure, it is more time, but you can have a bigger impact on your community.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also shocking. Sorry, I'll just say one thing that I circulate. You may appreciate this. One other way that we haven't really touched on as far as being influential in the planning group process is, honestly, I'd say leveraging the position or the pulpit, if you will, of being involved in these things, whether you're a board member, secretary, you know, chair, vice chair. I think if you understand how media works and how you influence sort of the mainstream narrative, I've been able to, I'd say, find a fair amount of success in being quoted in the paper, or sort of, and you know, it's a combination of one, the fact that there is just legitimate interest in this community, but also two, kind of like I said, recognizing how you build relationships with reporters or different folks in different areas, because there's certainly a way that you can justifiably, I think, with some level of authority, frame any given issue from the perspective of the community. And that's something that I think we've been very deliberate and intentional in Midway about doing over these last few years. I think that's part of how we've been successful in, you know, some of the things that we have achieved. But yeah, sorry, just a random thought that came across me. I wanted to share.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. See, Crystal follows up with how about prep time for the meeting? I don't want to belabor it too much, but I think, you know, half an hour to an hour. Does that sound right to you guys? If you're sort of, you know, doing the minimum.
If you're doing the minimum, there's like zero prep time. You just show
Yeah,
up.
as I say, you show up. However long it takes you to connect to the Zoom or to get across to wherever you meet in person. And I should say, for the last few years, obviously COVID, you know, we all weren't virtual for a long time, but we just as of March 23, so recently, have transitioned fully back to in-person meetings from planning groups, which has been an adjustment. But yeah, it used to be you just click the button and you show up and it was great.
Yeah, sometimes I'll send out, like, a developer will ask me to, you know, or send out materials of a presentation. I'll come up and I'll hope the board reads it so that they like know what they want to ask questions about or know what details they want to discuss. But no, but people just show up. The developers will usually present everything they need to present. So yeah, zero prep, except maybe the commuting time to the venue that's going to be hosted at.
Cool. Do we have any other audience questions? All right. Well, I guess we can finish up there. Thank you so much to our panelists for being here. Thank you to everyone who attended. This will be on YouTube later, as will our other meeting about this. So if you know anybody who couldn't make it, or if you can't remember something, hop on YouTube and find that. And then I did want to plug Marlon's, the planning department is looking for a, I forgot the name, what you're calling it, the Equity Forward group.
Oh yeah, members of the focus, the focus discussion group. Yeah, the application needs to be sent today because today's the deadline. So please do if you're interested.
And I just dropped that link in the chat.
Perfect. Thanks, Jesse.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Cool.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Yeah, this has been great.